say that Isis came near from the planets around the star Sirius, and Osiris, her brother, which is ironic because he's not really her brother, comes from the Orion planets around the belt of Orion's belt. So they knew that their beings were called starry beings. The goddess knew it, who is called also Nut. I don't think she's a nut. Is to represent the entire universe. So they knew too that their beings, their deities, are not just for the earth. And many other cultures, Greece, Rome, etc., say that their gods and goddesses were derogatory to specifically the earth, which makes them earth watchers, which is fine. But the Egyptians didn't believe that. They knew that their deities were on other levels and other parts of the universe and other dimensions of the universe. And they knew that to reach the book of life, dead, is called the book of coming into the light, night as well as day. And it really has more to do with living. It's true, it's in the tombs and temples and things. They used it in the tombs because they knew that the spirit of the being who has been mummified could use that to transmit or transform themselves into the next dimensions. But they also used that during their living times. People knew that they could do those things. High priests, high priestesses, kings and queens, mostly the chief pharaoh, the pharaoh and his chief wife, for instance, Ramses II and Nefertari, she was his great wife. He had, 90 other wives?
That's a lot of wives.
The man lived to be 96 years old. I think he died of exhaustion. He had like 90 children. God. Yeah, at least 90 children. They're still digging them up. They're in KB5, what would you do? Call her Wednesday and her Thursday and this one March 52nd? It was crazy. They had all these guys, all these wives. But the reason was because, let's face it, they had a very high birth rate and death rate. We're just finishing the Feast of Bast, the cat goddess, that ran from May 7th, which is the birthday of my cat, which makes me believe he's a gift from Bast, until the sunrise on the 21st of June, which will be the summer solstice, the 22nd. At which point I do a ritual called Ra Rising. We build a beautiful barge. I put on an image of Ra, and we float it out into the ocean. I'm used to doing that. Well, I'm used to doing that on Long Island, out to the South Shore, because I'm South Shore, and I'm strictly South Shore. And they, but now I have to do it here in Savannah, and I don't know what the Savannians are going to think. I guess my statue of Ra will be made out of shrimp. They're all into shrimp. And I can't help it. I don't take the world too seriously anymore. I think that when you make people laugh, they listen. And when they listen, they learn something.
Exactly.
So this is how I work. And I teach my people that way too, with humor. The Egyptians have two gods, Anubis, Anupu in his language, not Anu-Opu, and Bes. And both of those deities, Bes is a strange deity. He's a dwarf. He wears the skin of a lion. Hercules Invictus, who's a dear friend of ours, relates to Bes because Hercules also wore a skin of a lion. Bes is from Assyria originally, and he came over with another goddess, and the Egyptians did that. They took into their family, their celestial family, many other gods and goddesses. They weren't the people that would say, my way is the only way. Or we only have these gods or these gods. They say, this one in column A is pretty good. Let's bring them into our god family, goddess family. And I like that. They realized that everybody was different. They were, as you know, a multiracial people. They were African from Sub-Saharan and from East Africa and Sub-Saharan African, and they were also Arabic peoples and Hamitic peoples because they all mixed together. And that's why the Egyptians, some of them had very strange, almost a reddish tint to their skins. They like to think that the women looked lighter and the men were more redder and darker because they decided that deeper skinned men were more handsome and lighter skinned women were more beautiful. So the women, of course, as you know, bathed in goat milk.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, if you take milk and you add lemons to it, which is what they did, you're creating what? Alpha hydroxy. And that is a bleaching agent, isn't it? My background is also cosmetology, as I know yours is as well. Your energy's got that right there. Your makeup is beautiful. I like the lip color. It's just right.
Thank you so much.
But you know that your skin, I'm going to get crazy and be makeup artist here. You know that your whole work is warm. So you're keeping your hair and your lips and things in a warm thing. Black and white is actually neutral. They say cool, but it's neutral. I'm from New York. We live in black, so everybody wears it. To me, black is neutral. Everybody wears it. But I find that they knew more about cosmetics. I mean, let's face it. Cleopatra the seventh, the Philippator, said to the priests and priestesses in Aman, "Give me that eyeliner stuff." And she ground coal. She ground sapphires, she put up, and also lapis lazuli and malachite around her eyes. And she knew, because she was Macedonian, she knew about honey and perfumes and things, and she was a priestess of Isis. The mistake is, she said, "I am Isis." She said it as she's chanting to invoke, bringing into yourself the goddess. And she knew that. She also knew that her life was finite. I have a book also called The Serpent Wore Two Crowns, which is about her, kind of. I don't believe she died when they say she did. I think she took somebody else's life. She took on somebody else's life. And so I think she actually accomplished what she wanted to do, which was become the mistress of Rome. And I think she did. There was Livia. And Livia suddenly was a nobody in Rome. She came from a family that was actually in bad favor. And she suddenly disappears for a while. And she comes back, and she looks a little different. Cleopatra the Seventh had 4 children. Caesarion by Caesar, and
Mark Antony?
Cleopatra Selene and Alexander Helios, and Ptolemy Philadelphos. And there was also a young girl who didn't make it past the age of 3. Her name was Cynthia, which is, of course, a moon goddess, worshipped by the Macedonians. So she took those children with her, and maybe they became Tiberius and her children, because we don't know what happened to them. Livia disappears, and all of a sudden, she's an expert on poisons. Cleopatra was an expert on poisons. She knows about astrology and witchcraft. Livia was a Roman patrician woman. She couldn't even read. Cleopatra read. She spoke 9 languages. She wrote 32 books in her life, and she ruled Egypt alone for 22 years. Also, she was friends with Octavian, not an enemy. She was 23 when she met Caesar. Caesar brought her to Rome. He was 18, 19, and they lived in his villa, Caesar's villa, up in Tuscany, and somewhere near the seven hills or such, so that they were able to get to Rome. Caesar, of course, was married to Calpurnia, but he had many other mistresses. We know, of course, that were. I'm trying to think of the other lady's name. Doesn't matter. Anyway,
Michael, also too, Cleopatra, she was fooling around with Julius Caesar, and then she was fooling around with Mark Antony, right?
She fooled around with Caesar because he was powerful. He was 56 and she was, 17, 18?
Mm-hmm.
She knew that he was a man that would teach her about government and would help her to stabilize Egypt. She had a very bad situation with her brother, Ptolemy the 13th, who wanted her dead. She was a little bit older. She was 16. He was about, I think they said 13. He was ruled over by his two regents, Vatianus and Theocritus, the two, his teachers. They ran Egypt while he was, he was a kid. The same thing that Ai and Horemheb did to Tutankhamun. They ran it while he was, going, I don't know. So they wanted to get rid of Cleopatra because she was too intelligent and she knew what she was doing. Her father was going to name her his heir. They named both because that's what Rome wanted. And she knew that she was going to make it. She was going to make it because of Rome. She was smart. Why did she hang out with Antony, who was a drunken idiot? Because she could. And we know from different writings that the children of Mark Antony weren't even Mark Antony's. Why else would they be allowed to live if they'd been his children, since Octavian allegedly hated him? They would have killed them. I believe they were the children of her lover, whose name was Apollodorus. He was her detritus. He was the one that took care of her since she was a little girl. He was like her personal bodyguard.
Michael, they never found Cleopatra's gravesite, right?
There's a bunch of women right now in Alexandria and outside of it, and near the temple of Isis at Philae and Aswan, that are looking for Cleopatra. They probably need to go look in Rome, I think. What they do when they open that tomb, they're going to find Mark Antony's ashes. The Romans didn't bury their people so much yet. They did later on in the Roman period, but at that point they were cremating them, as in the fashion of the Greeks. And, Cleopatra was a Ptolemy. She knew about mummification and things, but I do believe that she was Livia. I think because Livia lived a long time, she knocked off everybody that got in her way, and so did Cleopatra. And in the book I, Claudius, there is a scene where the young granddaughter Livilla says to, and that's by Robert Graves, by the way, you can look it up. She says, "Grandmother, I was told you were the most beautiful woman in all of the kingdom, and all of the empire." And she looks over at a bust of Cleopatra and she says, "Well, there was once another in Egypt, but she's gone now." And she sort of giggles because that's her, and she knows that. But you see, think about it. The public didn't see those people up close, did they? They saw them from the top of a high staircase or what have you. Octavian knew well enough to stay clear. Look what happened to his uncle. He became Swiss cheese. So he stayed away from those people. It was important that the royals in all things were a little bit shielded, aloof. I know that I lived in that lifetime. I know too much about them. When I was a child, it's going to sound silly, but I saw a poster about 40 feet high of Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra. And I looked at this beautiful woman, laying on a couch and just gorgeous. I didn't know who she was. The moment my father said, "Oh, that's Cleopatra," it was like a stream of consciousness. Bang! I knew that name. Who was she? She was somebody I knew. My teacher said, "Oh, you were Cleopatra." I'm like, "Oh, really? Come on." You know how many Cleopatras I've met? Or Napoleons or Henry VIII or nobody's ever somebody who wasn't famous. It's nonsense. I know that I was a barber in the time of Henry VIII. My name was Hal, and I actually hung myself on his four-poster. I have problems with my neck, and I know it's because I hung myself.
Michael, that is so true. People, if they say they've been reincarnated, most of them will say that they were reincarnated from a famous person. It's never just a normal, ordinary person. It's somebody famous.
Right. The one that gave me the most in my life is Setna West, who is the name that I took. When I was a child, I drew as my signature for my artwork, the Eye of Horus. This thing. I didn't know what it was, but I called it the Eye of Horus. And then later, as I started to read more, I said, "Oh my God, it really is the Eye of Horus." And I knew what it was. I knew what an ankh was for. I knew that it was a blasting rod, a magic wand. It wasn't just this thing, and it wasn't a cross. I get very angry when people think, oh, it's a cross. It's a key, and it vibrates, and it's there to send energy into the universe. It's got nothing to do with crosses. It's not for pain. That's another religion. That's their business, and that's fine. I don't judge anyone, but it's not a cross. But I knew that, and I read and write hieroglyph like you do English, and I speak other languages too. I also write in Theban script, and also some of the Celtic runes. Let's face it, I grew up as a witch, so we use the runic script, and we use Theban script, which of course is the secret Alexandrian language.
And many ancient. I'm sorry, Michael. In many ancient sites, you will find some type of image of a key.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Now remember also, in witch practice, and I'm a witch, a key is also a symbol that we use for Hecate. It is the one thing to send from the goddess Hecate. Well, of course, in the Greek traditions and other European traditions, is the high power of magic. I don't want to call her a goddess. That's kind of insulting. She's a titaness. She's more powerful than any goddess would be. As is Isis. Isis is also not a goddess. She's also, we call them Niteru or Diter. She's a power force beyond that. She was taught by Thoth, Tehuti, and Ptah at the behest of Ra to learn magic. And then she played a trick on Ra, and she got his magical name, and she became more powerful. She became the great enchantress.
Michael, didn't also too Isis have some type of magical staff?
They all do. It's called a Wa staff.
Okay.
And a Wa staff, you've seen the oh, I have it. Wait, hold on.
Okay.
It's actually an ankh with a jet pillar. That's Osiris, and it has also, it's almost like a pterodactyl's head on a long spike. And if you ever see that the music I Saw the Sign, that's what the staff looks like. But Isis, like all the other deities, almost always used her ankh to send energy to people. You'll see them all in all the statues and paintings and temples holding their ankh to their nose or to their mouth to bring them the breath of eternal life and magical life. That sends that forward into the universe. People think about the Egyptians only involved with death, and that's silly. They considered death just a step, just another thing that they were going to do. The reason they really mummified the bodies were in a lot of ways to connect the silver cord to the astral body or the spirit body, but also to say thank you. You've served me well this time. Let's face it, how many of us have shells, literally shells in their houses? And that's all we are, is a shell. So to keep that shell fresh, sort of, I don't know, they kind of scraped out people's brains. They took out everything except the heart. They dried you up. Mummies are basically human raisins.
Yes.
They're, but it's to say thank you. Look at all the gifts and things that they leave in the tombs. They were thanking that body, and every single tomb has a false door called the spirit door. People bring gifts of perfume and bread and wine and offerings, and they also brought, like the Peruvians do, they bring letters to the dead to say, can you help me? I'm trying to see if I can get to Albuquerque. I took a wrong turn, My alter ego is Bugs Bunny, so forgive me for that. But I can't help it. That's who I am. I'm serious when I have to be, and then sometimes I'm Osiris or Osirius, But we've got to let things go that way and let the energy be positive. We all know, let your heart be light so you're laughing. Well, in the ancient traditions, if you didn't let your heart be light and it was heavy like a stone, they'd throw it to a creature called Amit, and your electrical energies were used another way. You would not become any longer a physical being. You might end up a battery. You might end up a charger.
Let's not
Your
have that.
energy was used your energy was used some other way than to go into a physical form or a living being form, because your energy was no good. I mean, like, think what happened to Idi Amin or Hitler or Caligula or Elizabeth Bathory. All those people were really sort of miserable. So why would you want to put that back in a being, a physical being, where it can do harm? I'm a witch. Our energy is to say, do with that will show me the whole of the law, that it harms none. And that's the codicil people forget. They all go on about Aleister Crowley and his do what thou wilt show me the whole of the law, which he didn't write. It's very ancient.
Mm-hmm.
And that it harms none was the other part that they don't put in there.
Right.
With harm to none. And as a high priest, that's what I tell everybody. Do what you're going to do. Do it well. But don't hurt anybody else, because you're going to get the karma.
That's right. Threefold law.
So we don't need that. There's enough. Look, I lived in Newark. I had a really bad karma right there. So, you don't want to do that. What do they do to deserve Newark, New Jersey? I don't know. But I lived there for 8 years, and were 8 of the most miserable years of my life. I've done my time, and now I'm in Savannah. So, it's kind of Salem in the South.
Yep.
New Orleans thinks it is, but I'm telling you, I went to a witch fair Sunday. There was so many witches that are in the broom closet. They're all afraid of showing who they really are, except to each other, so they can sell jewelry or sell, incense or things. They're not out in the open. I'm about as shy as a volcano, as you can tell. So I don't hide anything about myself. I'm just Michael. And I'm not going to pretend I'm any more or less than who I am. When you present yourself like this, people respect you more, because you're who you are. I live in Ma'at. I live truth. I live my truth. And it's the only way to be, and I teach my people the same thing. Live your truth. And yes, we do work with the past lives. It's important to me, because then you know what they always say, if you don't study the history, you end up repeating it. So if you've made mistakes in your past lives, we need to learn about them. So if you know what they are, you know where you're going.
Hey, Michael, I got something to ask you. In Egypt, in the hieroglyphics, you see a lot of things, depictions of a griffin, a sphinx, an anubis, a minotaur. Were the gods or extraterrestrials, let's say, did they come down to Egypt? Did they experiment and take a person and then put a dog head on that person?
Oh, come on. You're going into the Stargate, aren't you? Please. Here's what I think, that these starry beings, people looked at these beings that have the different heads and such. I know that they were either helmets or masks. Now, look at there's some people in South America and also Aboriginal peoples that have seen, pilots that have helmets. Well, they draw them with a round head, don't they? Or they draw them with the way they look at the helmet. Now, if the helmet looked like a snake, because it might have had a pipe in it, why wouldn't they think that's a cobra goddess? Or it had points on it, it could be a cat goddess, or a beak, something that looked like a beak. Now, we all know that during the medieval period, people had masks on against the bubonic plague that looked like, well, frankly, penguins. You've seen them. They've got with long.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Okay, so if you saw that walking around and you're a primitive person, wouldn't you think that's a god? Now, how do we also know that all the jewelry and such that they did, how do we know that that wasn't, part of some kind of equipment for their lifespan? And, the mask might have been something that saved their lives. It's also said in some of the text, in the pyramid text, that the gods had those faces so they could walk among humans without revealing who they really were.
I never thought of it that way. I always thought that maybe that was just the planet that they came from, that they were half-breeds, but I never thought of it that way, that it was it could be like their life suit, their
astronaut
suit.
Their skin was gold, And how do we know that wasn't some kind of a space suit? We don't know.
Yeah.
You know, and then they've got this thing in the head. If you look at some of the statues, the heads are larger. And they also, if it's a small head like an ibis, you're gonna see a wig, a large wig, and then symbols above it, so that it makes what would be the head larger. So you've got a cobra, and you've got the cobra is wearing a wig, and she's got on a tremendous headpiece. Okay, now we know what astronauts look like these days.
Right.
We're talking about Neolithic culture. I mean, you had people from Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt, of course, being in the south, which makes no sense, and Lower Egypt being in the north. And why is that so? Because the Nile is the only river in the world that flows north.
Well, wait a minute, though, Michael, though. There are also two depictions of what looks like a dog's body or a lion's body with a human head.
Right.
So
the
that,
Sphinx, for instance.
yeah.
The Sphinx. Well, we think pretty much that the pharaoh Khufu and his son Khephren created the Sphinx. It's been pretty much proved. I do think it originally had the head of a lion or the head of Anubis, the way its body is. We don't know because if you look at it now, I was in Egypt. I was in Egypt a long time ago, but in this life. Okay, and when I got to the Sphinx, the whole paws and everything are all bricks. They're all new, and the head has been ripped. The crown, the Nemesis it's called, was repaired. So what we see isn't even what it might have been. And I think that they chiseled off the head that was there and carved it into King Khufu's head to make it. But I think it was older than that, and it was probably from other times. I don't think it was some, thousands and thousands and thousands of years earlier. Dr. John Anthony West said that he thinks the pyramid, the Sphinx, was 30,000 years old. I don't think so. I think it was done in the 4th dynasty. And I do think that they made it as a guardian for at that time there were 3 pyramids.